Esper control. His opponent, Allan Basham, is playing an Esper mid-range deck, although this is much more of an Esper humans derivative, you would say?
Yeah, I mean, it's very white-based, using creatures like Precinct Captain, Brimaz, Obsidat, Soldier of the Pantheon, Archangel of Thune. The blue and black splashes are primarily for support cards like Hero's Downfall and Detention Sphere, but he also has Afara, God of the Paulus.
As you see, Allan lead off here with a basic plains and a Soldier of the Pantheon.
This deck actually reminds me quite a bit of the black-white deck that Paul Rietzel and I played at the last PT. It's basically just the same concept, but with Afara instead of Desecration Demon and Detention Sphere.
Hollow Fountain tap for Allan and Soldier of Pantheon across for 2. No follow-up play. And Jensen with a Temple of Enlightenment. Godless Shrine untapped for Allan. And here is Brimaz. Soldier of Pantheon across for 2. Knocking Jensen down to 16. Brimaz, a card that got a lot of hype on spoiler season, hasn't quite lived up to it yet in Standard.
I mean, at least it has the right numbers for beating Bile Blight. The big challenge has been that Mizium Mortars has surged in popularity, but the Sphere of Heliod we see coming down is partly a response to that, you know? Once your Brimaz is up to a 4/5.
So Jensen plays a Hollow Fountain untapped, his 3rd mana, and passes the turn with no play, representing Dissolve, which he'll use here on Spear of Heliod. And Jensen mulling over his Scry.
I mean, obviously what he wants is a Supreme Verdict, but anything that deals with Brimaz would at least get things stabilized.
A Detention Sphere.
Yeah,
even
Doom
Jace
Blade
would do a little bit of work. So Brimaz triggers, makes a token, and Allan across for 5 points of damage.
6 even. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, this is quite the. This is exactly how Allan wants to be opening.
Yep.
Now Jensen did keep a card on top from his Scry, which means we're probably going to see the Supreme Verdict.
Basic Plains and Supreme Verdict here for William to clear up the board. Allan remembers the Soldier of Pantheon trigger.
Nice.
Very impressive. That's something I call, it's like being a Major League Baseball player. If you remember 30% of the time, you're doing really good. Another Brimaz from Allan. A Temple from William. Scries to the bottom. And simply passes the turn. Brimaz into the red zone and hit with an Azorius Charm after the trigger.
However, another Brimaz to follow it up.
Yeah. And Brimaz, not a card that you imagine doing a lot of legwork against a deck like Esper, but it's still the raw power you can see. It's here.
Oh, I mean, definitely. But part of what makes the Brimaz so good in this matchup compared to how it would be in most other decks is that he has so many big threats, each of which needs to be answered. And so you end up in the spot where it's like, okay, Brimaz, you have to deal with this or I'll win the game. Then, another big threat, whether it's Obsidat, Archangel, even Precinct Captain.
Yeah, he has a lot of threats in his deck that definitely require fast responses. He's Jensen here really mulling over this play. I saw Elspeth in hand. Don't know if he has the corresponding 6th mana.
Now, I think what he might be thinking about is whether or not to Sphinx's Revelation tapping out on his main phase, just in case he draws a tap land, because he desperately needs to hit that Elspeth. So he does have the land, and we're going to see the Elspeth.
He falls to 5 here to play Hollow Fountain untapped, plays Elspeth Sun's Champion, and pluses it to make 3 tokens. Again attacking with Brimaz and his token, triggering and making another token.
This is a real hard spot for Allan to climb out of now. This is all swung very quickly. He has Hero's Downfall and Detention Sphere type cards in his deck, but nothing like that available to him right now. And his hand is full of cards he can't cast because 2 of them are more Brimazes and 1 is a 5-drop.
And Allan does not add another Bramaz to his board and simply passes the turn with the one that he has in play.
Yeah, the legendary drawback definitely coming back to
Yep.
haunt him here. Fortunately, the ability to drop the Archangel next turn will be, at least present a possible way to get out of this.
But Elspeth's so good against just random creatures.
Definitely. Unfortunately, Allan draws another 5-drop, does not have the 5th land, and we are seeing things slip away very, very quickly. We're getting to the point where not even a land isn't going to help him. The 5-drops are too slow at this point.
And here's an end of turn Revelations for Jensen for 3. And if you've ever played against Blue-White or Esper, you get the feeling that this is where Jensen's about to shift gears and start really taking this game over.
Yeah, and as we see now, he's got an Elspeth that has the board completely under control and a counterspell in hand. Not even a top-decked Hero's Downfall or Detention Sphere can turn this one around.
So Jensen again plussing Elspeth. 4 tokens in play. Detention Sphere, the draw for Allan. Perhaps too little, too late.
Yeah, he needed this any turn before now. But this is what that Esper control deck does, It slows things down a little bit. It tries to not die for a little while. It puts down something that's going to make it so it actually is gaining some kind of an advantage. But then as soon as it Sphinx's Revelations, then it takes the driver's seat.
So Allan attacks with his Bramaz there. Jensen throws all 4 tokens in front to get Bramaz off the table, leaving him with 1 soldier. And now Jensen gets untapped with a boatload of mana, Elspeth at 6, and a lot of cards in hand. And now he's on the offensive, attacking with his soldier token.
Yeah, he's going to have 3 more soldiers to defend himself, so the free beats are the best.
Just pluses Elspeth yet again. Allan draws an Elspeth of his own, but with only 4 mana in play, will offer very little help. And now Jensen with an end of turn, Rev for 6. This has been a very surgical game, it feels like, from Jensen. Took his lumps, but now firmly in command.
Yeah, I mean, things were looking a lot rougher early on. But I think what might have ended, I think the real deciding point was when Jensen countered the Spear of Heliod. That if he would have still had that spear in his hand for a later turn, like when Jensen, for instance, the turn where he did nothing because his hand was full of legends, it may have been able to help him offer a little bit more resistance. So that is one of the risks of playing a deck with this many 5 and 6 drops and still have an aggro opening with no card draw. Sometimes you just don't get up to 5 in time.
So Thoughtseize from Jensen takes Archangel of Thune, and now Jensen with just a boatload of tools, just going about ending the game as quickly as possible. Makes an Elspeth emblem, Detention Sphere is the Bramaz, and sends across for 12 points of damage.
Yeah, he knows that nothing going on last turn was relevant, and he has a counterspell in hand in case Allan draws anything relevant this turn.
Precinct captain the draw from Allan, and now all we're waiting for is the concession. And there it is.
Backs it in.
So yeah, that's going back a little bit to what you were talking about with that 3rd turn of the game. When Jensen plays the Hallowed Fountain untap and passes the turn, do you think there's an argument for just not playing anything at all? When Allan has Bramaz in play, he kind of has a board, he has the Soldier Pantheon. Is the risk of that card being dissolved there? Maybe the Scribe really matters, or maybe you really need that Spear later on. Is there an argument there for Allan to just cast nothing at all?
Yeah, I think that first of all, the 2 damage was a very real cost there. You're not going to just pay 2 life to bluff the vast majority of the time. And even if he was bluffing, he only prevented 1 damage compared to having the Spear down, whereas the Spear represents such a powerful threat at any other point. So, but it's not clear that he could have turned it around without having that 5th land. Either way, though, that was definitely the key decision point.
Yeah.
And I think it was really good it was obviously an excellent play on Jensen's part, paying the 2 life, deciding, even though this is going to give information, I got to just run it. This is the best chance I have of, just run out the untapped land.
Yeah. So moving on to the sideboard here, Jensen has 1 ultimate price, a Faded Retribution, 2 Gainsay, a Negate, 2 Hero's Downfall, 3 copies of Blood Baron of Viscopa, an Archangel of Thune, 2 New Blades, and 2 Thoughtseizes. I think nearly all of the cards in the sideboard are live, potentially. The additional
Definitely.
spot removal is very valuable. Allan's base black-white deck is probably quite susceptible to Blood Baron.
Definitely.
The additional counter spells, once you see all those extra threats, those expensive threats, rather, I mean, and even Gainsay is theoretically live. I mean, Allan has blue cards, including Detention Sphere. I think here that I would want the additional removal spells, the Blood Barons, and probably the extra Thoughtseizes as well, because Allan's likely going to be sideboarding into bigger, more durable, more cumbersome threats.
I think the real question just ends up being, how much does Jensen have to take out? Because, as you said, basically all 15 of these cards could come in if he wanted, but he has too many great options, so he's going to have to bench things like Gainsay and Negate at the very least. He's going to want things like Hero's Downfall, Doomblade, Ultimate Price, Blood Baron, and so on. I think the question is, out of things like Thoughtseize, Fated Retribution, Archangel of Thune, it's just a question of how many of the main deck cards are worse than those. Things like Syncopate, Azorius Charm, perhaps some number of Planeswalkers. More likely, though, I think he might end up having to decide, am I going to be playing with a little bit of permission or a little bit of discard? Because I don't think he can afford to play with very much of both.
Yeah, and it's possible this is something that gets swapped whether or not he's on the play or on the draw, because the counter spells, particularly Syncopate, so much better when you're on the play, and the discard spells are a lot more reliable when you're on the draw. So there's some wiggle room for maybe that kind of swap too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that given the texture of that first game, where we saw Allan never drop below 3 cards in hand, but tapping, only casting 1 spell each turn, I think those are signs that Jensen might slightly favor having a little bit of permission, just for the tempo that it provides to waste Allan's entire turn.
And on Allan's side, he has an Aetherling, 2 Blood Barons of Vizkopa, an Erebos, God of the Dead, a Heliod, God of the Sun, 2 Bile-Blights, 2 Glare of Heresies, 2 Supreme Verdicts, 2 Revoke Existence, and 2 copies of Thoughtseize. So I would imagine that the gods here are for slower matchups alongside the 2 copies of Thoughtseize. Maybe Blood Baron as well. There's going to be some times where, of course, the Esper deck has Supreme Verdict, has counter spells, but there are spots where Blood Baron is actually a tough card for them to answer. But I do fear, in a structural sense, trying to be too slow, because the slower game favors Jensen so much.
Yeah, the nice thing, though, is that he has a bunch of easy cuts. Unlike Jensen, Allan has a lot of suboptimal cards game 1 that are a little bit slower that he can take out. Swapping your Archangel of Thunes for Blood Barons is just a straight up big upgrade, for this matchup. And trimming things like a little bit of your spot removal in exchange for things like Thoughtseize is another just real clear win. And things like Imposing Sovereign, I mean, he doesn't have a ton of early plays, but Imposing Sovereign is just so bad in this matchup, whereas having access to gods for much more, Erebos and Heliod for much more durable, stronger threats is a pretty big upgrade. What I wonder is he going to consider the Glare of Heresy? Because it's not always at its best versus these control decks, but they all play 4 Detention Spheres, some number of them sideboard creatures some amount of the time. And most importantly, that game he was traumatized by the Elspeth. Does he want to have the Miser's answers to Elspeth?
Yeah, I'm interested. And I'm interested in your point on Imposing Sovereign. I played a lot of, Boros, and I played the Orzhov aggro deck at the Invitational in Las Vegas in December. I actually liked Imposing Sovereign okay in this matchup, because it does provide you or rather, when I was playing those very aggressive white strategies, because it provides some utility against Blood Baron and Elspeth, which are Esper and Blue-White's best cards against you. Now, I don't know if Allan has enough pressure in his deck to really make that a game plan where, he's forcing the issue and threatening lethal on turn 5, and Imposing Sovereign is a piece of that puzzle. But when I was playing very aggressive white-based strategies, I actually like the card fine in this kind of matchup.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Imposing Sovereign's value against control is largely just dependent on how much do you appreciate, an extra twiddle, like removing one extra blocker one time.
All right, so Allan with a mulligan leads off with a Temple, as does Jensen.
Oh, it's interesting. So we see one more card from Allan that we hadn't discussed yet, which is Bile-Blight. The functionality for Bile-Blight, of course, is that it can sweep all the Elspeth tokens. Normally not super great against Esper, but as we saw that game, he was very traumatized by the whole Elspeth situation.
Right. Things were looking kind of okay for him, and then Elspeth took the game over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if he would have drawn a Bile-Blight, he could have been in a winning position that game, killing all the tokens and then attacking to kill Elspeth. Right.
So Allan has kept it an Imposing Sovereign, cast it on his 3rd turn alongside his 3rd Temple.
Oh, is that Bio? Maybe that's Erebos. No, it's both Erebos and BioBlight.
Yeah.
So Imposing Sovereign beginning the beatdown.
Just a Plains untap from Jensen and passes the turn back.
Now, what do you think you lead here? There's the Spear and the God. Jensen's got Dissolve mana up. And there's, he goes straight to the throat with Brimaz.
So this sets him up potentially, if this forces Jensen to untap and Supreme Verdict, then he could potentially land one of his gods.
Definitely.
So we'll
Which
see
I
if
think
that's
is what we're going to see.
Right, so we see exactly this. Jensen decides not to dissolve Brimaz, rather just untaps, plays Hallowed Found untap, plays Supreme Verdict, and now Allan has an opening to resolve a god. And we see Erebos God of the Dead show up for Allan.
Now, Jensen does have many answers to this, or at least many detention spheres, which we are likely going to see here. But now this is putting him on the back foot because he has this Dissolve in hand that he can't do as he keeps spending all of his mana every turn dealing with threats.
So Jace Archetype of Thought for Jensen, he'll minus. I don't believe he had a land in his hand, so likely just digging for mana. The split comes 2 Temples and a Blood Baron. Jensen quickly scoops up the lands.
Snaps it up.
And you can see Jensen has brought in the Blood Barons. You see 1 copy in his hand right now. So Allan untaps, plays Soldier of the Pantheon. Plays Spear of Heliod as well. So chooses not to use Erebos this turn, instead choosing to advance his board.
Yeah, Erebos is probably going to be at his best each of the turns where Jensen has mana, giving him a way to get some value without walking into counterspells. When Jensen is tapped out is the perfect time to play as much as he can.
But Jensen untaps with a boatload of cards in hand. Jace on 2. Mulling over his options. Can't just stick Blood Baron right now because Soldier of the Pantheon's in a way. Jensen casts Detention Sphere. Targets Erebos.
Yeah, Soldier of the Pantheon and Blood Baron do kind of a funny dance. Obviously, the Blood Baron can't block the Soldier of the Pantheon, and the Soldier of the Pantheon can't block the Blood Baron. So we end up in the spot where, you know, Jensen wants to kind of just ride this Jace and make sure that Allan doesn't gain an advantage from anything else.
So Allan untaps, and he decided into a pretty slow and reactive deck here. He has BioBlight, Elspeth, and Detention Sphere in hand. So Soldier of Pantheon comes across, knocks Jace down to 1 loyalty.
Which is definitely quite good that that Spear is allowing him to make a little more progress than he otherwise would.
And a turn ultimate price from Jensen on the Soldier. Now untaps, and Allan with nothing in play besides a Spear and some lands.
What do you think about the mixture of Doomblades and ultimate prices these days? Like, which way is the scales are the scales balanced?
I think it's marginally better to be having Doomblades in your deck. Although the thing is, they're often interchangeable, but Ultimate Price is so much worse against Mono Blue Devotion. But Doomblade is sort of worse in a lot of other different spots. So it has a lot to do with what you think, how much Mono Blue you think is going to be in the tournament, basically. Jensen minusing the Jace one last time. Again, looking at Detention Sphere versus lands. And I think you're seeing some of the risk here of trying to slide into a slower, more reactive strategy against a deck like Esper Control.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't play a better slow game than an Esper deck with your Esper. I mean, it's like they're both trying to play a slow Esper game, and one of them has counterspells and Sphinx's Revelation.
Yep. So Jensen lands Blood Baron with 3 mana untapped. Allan draws his 6th land. A Watery Grave he plays untapped and attempts to resolve Elspeth. And this looks like a Syncopate for 1 from Jensen.
Yeah, I think this was Allan's last great big hope.
Now Jensen untaps. Again, Blood Baron in play, Dissolve in hand. And firmly in control. We see another copy of Jace Archetype of Thought from Jensen. Quickly minuses it, reveals 2 Temple of Enlightenments and Supreme Verdict. Allan again splits land spells. Jensen takes the Supreme Verdict.
At this point, he just wants to have all his bases covered.
Yep.
You know, as many contingency plans as possible.
Plays a Temple and Scribes to the bottom, and now Blood Baron comes across. And I see this a lot, you know, people trying to side into mixtures of powerful threats and maybe additional counter spells, maybe a lot of discard. But it's very hard to beat decks like Blue-White Control and Esper Control in my mind unless you're applying a lot of pressure, because they're just so much better suited than you are to play that sort of game.
Yeah, if you want to beat them going long, you have to stick something like Underworld Connections, you know.
Yeah.
And even that is so dicey because they have plenty of answers.
So Allan plays a Bramaz. Jensen says, that's fine, that resolves.
I think one of the keys is you got to thought seize them before they cast Sphinx's Revelation.
Yeah.
Once they Sphinx, it's already too late.
All right, Jensen gonna minus his Jace yet again.
And even though we haven't actually seen Revelations proper this game, Jace has served a very similar role.
Yeah, this is 4 cards from this Jace and the previous Jace. Or the option to take up to 4 cards, rather.
Yeah, I mean, it keeps looking like Jensen is effectively looking at 4 cards each turn. You know, his draw phase and then his choice of the top 3.
Jensen with a second copy of Blood Baron. Just testing the water to see if it resolves before he attacks, which it does. Now the first Blood Baron comes across. And Allan with a white piece of removal and a black piece of removal, not providing a lot of utility against these Blood Barons.
Yeah. It is real tough to have the reactive cards.
Huh. Well, Allan has drawn and cast Supreme Verdict, so he has brought those in apparently and has a little bit more time, but still in a ton of trouble.
And that's the problem. Even when you get them like this, how much have you really done?
Yeah.
Like, it was great that he was able to trade his Bramaz and Supreme Verdict for 2 Blood Barons, but it's not going to change the state of affairs. I mean, Jensen can just drop another big threat.
And he has right here an Elspeth Sun's Champion, which he quickly pluses. I believe that is an Obstat drawn for Allan. It is. Allan instead leads with Detention Sphere, taking care of Elspeth, and now has Bioblight for the token. So again, he's answering things, but he's not making any sort of real forward progress.
Yeah, without any card draw, he's not really getting anywhere.
And Jensen has just drawn Sphinx's Revelation, so Allan attempts to Bioblight.
Jensen's just happy as can be that he's in a spot to be able to...
So Jensen plays a Revoke Existence to get back his Elspeth and pluses it. And untaps, or passes the turn rather, with a lot of mana left over and Sphinx's Revelation at the ready. Allan attempts to resolve Soldier of the Pantheon. I guess Jensen deciding if he wants to rev in response, but says no. And now Allan attempts to land Obsidat, and that's going to be met with Dissolve.
Yeah, that is basically the one card Allan could play that would get Jensen to not just Sphinx as hard as he can. Jensen instead would rather just have play a little slower and just make sure things don't get crazy here.
So Jensen draws another Sphinx's Revelation on his turn, plus his Elspeth. And now we're going to see a big main phase Revelations.
Absolutely. He doesn't even want to take, he doesn't want to take the chance of Allan drawing even a Gainsay in the unlikely event that he has them. He just wants as many cards as he possibly can.
So 9 fresh ones for Jensen.
Is that good?
It's a lot. I mean, in fairness, the cards are sort of on diminishing returns, so that's good for Allan, but so Jensen made that play on Allan's upkeep. That means that he didn't have to discard, but also prevents him from running into a counterspell off the top from Allan, like you just alluded to. Let's see what if Jensen can just sweep up the remains with all of the new cards he's just drawn.
Now, have you seen many of these Esper human decks? What's their niche? What are they trying? Like, who are they trying to attack?
Oh, we can talk. There's a lot of different things going on with that deck. We can once we're. It's too complicated to go in right now during the match. I'll tell you what. But yeah, we can definitely discuss that because they're trying to attack a lot of different stuff. So Jensen with the Supreme Verdict, plus his Elspeth again, passes the turn, discarding a couple lands. Allan draws a land and simply passes back. Another rev from Jensen. It feels like the biggest threat for Jensen losing the game at this point is somehow accidentally decking himself.
Yeah, I like the modest Sphinx's Revelation.
No, I don't need all of my mana. I can just, I can afford to only draw 6 here. I don't need the full 9 or what have you. So Jensen does not immediately make an emblem. He's aware of the presence of removal in Allan's deck and is willing to wait one more turn. So simply pluses his Elspeth up to 8, makes 3 more tokens, does some more discarding, and passes the turn back. Allan plays a Watery Grave and says go. We see the emblem from Elspeth coming across and a lethal attack. And there's a concession. William Jensen, 2 games ago to 0 against Allan Basham playing Esper midrange. A very straightforward and surgical win for Jensen.
Yeah, I mean, that was basically just the textbook Esper plan. Play a few reactive cards, pick his spots. What do you dissolve? What do you Supreme Verdict? What do you Detention Sphere? And then get ahead through card draw. And as always, Jason Sphinx's Revelation being the key to that, with Elspeth finishing the job relatively trivially. I mean, it could have been a lot of things, but Elspeth is just reliable in terms of it offers the most other dimensions and is the hardest to get rid of.
Yeah, and I'm just, I see these kind of games play out a lot on camera where someone is going, they're playing against a deck like Blue-White or Esper Control. They move into a lot of gods.